Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Kristen Donnelly, and I am one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. At Abbey Research, we deeply believe that empathy is a superpower that we can all develop. And we like to have conversations with people in order to do that. This series is part of that. It's called Welcome to My World. And in it, I get to talk to fascinating people from all over the world. You get to eavesdrop, and we get to learn what life looks like for a little bit for them, what their profession is, what their hobby is, in the belief that if we all understood each other just a little bit better, we might be able to get along just a little bit better. And today I am joined by an old friend, and that we've known each other for a long time. Not that we are both old, though I'm sure we both feel it most days. A seminary colleague who I've known for, like 10 years, I think. Sarah Rochelle Montoya is a coach who focused on transitions, motherhood, and grief. And she's currently working as a postpartum doula. Don't worry, I'm going to ask her what that is for those of you guys who don't know. She's a mother of 3 fantastic human beings, and she lives in San Francisco. Sarah Rowe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's just so fun to be here. I'm excited to chat with you. And I love what you're doing.
Thanks. The feeling is mutual, because I know while I'm not doing the motherhood thing, I love a lot of mothers, and postpartum is not a joke. And I'm glad that you're stepping into this space. So first off, let's clear up what a doula is, and then we'll get into some other stuff.
Right. So a postpartum doula is a person that comes into your life the first 6 weeks after childbirth to support the birthing person. A lot of times we say mothering the mother, but I'm actually working on using more gender neutral language, because the birthing person might not identify as a mother. But our role is to offer education and support for the person who has given birth or is parenting a young child, because you can also foster. And there are a lot of ways that a baby comes into your home. And so I offer support and education on feeding, sleep, and nutrition. And if the birthing person has actually given birth, like support for them and understanding what their body might need to help them heal. And the goal is to make it so that a parent is able to rest as much as possible, and that their needs are focused on by me, so that they can focus on the needs of the baby.
And all of that makes complete logical sense. And yet this is a radical idea that you like, this isn't. So I'm curious, before we get into anything else, about the 6 weeks. Is that a medical thing that at 6 weeks something different happens, or is that just a good time for coaching?
It's at 6 weeks. It's kind of both. So at the 6 week mark, there is a shift, medically speaking. In theory, you should be more fully healed, more able to walk around, more able to do things for yourself. And then also, I think it's a little bit of a cultural thing. And doula work is rooted in a lot of white American culture is not great at providing support to moms. But if you look at the Asian community, you look at Black communities, you look at Indigenous communities, a lot of them have this tradition of the first 40 days. And so we are coming from that, is looking at the wisdom that is in other spaces and saying the first 40 days is a common thing. And so how do we look at that and honor that?
Okay.
But some doulas do stay with families longer. Okay. My choice is to generally stay with families for only the first 6 weeks. And ideally the education would have been enough for them to take over from there. Okay. And then after the first 6 weeks, I might shift into a more coaching role.
Right.
Because I do have the 2 different jobs. So the coaching and then the doula work.
Okay, great. So I have 90 questions, and then you say something, I'm let me chase that. So just for clarification, what then would be the difference between a doula and a coach?
So in my coaching, it's more sitting with the mom, talking about her identity shifts, how she wants to show up as a mom, what she wants her parenting to be like, helping think through decisions around returning to work, not returning to work.
Okay.
In my doula work, I'm more specifically focused on the immediate educational needs and rest needs of a mother. In my personal philosophy, in your first 6 weeks, you're probably not doing a lot of deep work around your shift in identity. You're just resting and healing.
Yeah. Yeah. it seems like it's pretty traumatic, the whole birthing thing sometimes. So I can see that. And I think too, as you were talking, what it kind of really hit me is that the first 40 days is a lot about your body.
Mm-hmm.
And in most white Western culture, we skip paying attention to the birthing person's body. It's like, oh, you're fine now. Like, I remember talking to I think I was talking to my husband after a friend of ours gave birth, and I mentioned the word tearing, and he just like blinked a few times. I was like, okay, we're going to talk really quickly about what birthing is, because it's like he's never been given the opportunity to learn, because we're not making that journey. So it's like body, and then we get into identity and spirit and soul, and then there are doulas that also work like in a midwifery capacity, right, as well. Okay, so it's a lot around the entire birthing journey, which should, right, in your point, include the first 40 days of the new child's life.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, yeah, so birth doulas are different than postpartum doulas. And I don't do birth right now, primarily because since I have 3 small children at home, I can't be on call for somebody to be with them through their labor.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is not the season for me to step into that world. No. And also, even despite working in a hospital for 6 years, I get squeamish around blood and other things. And so I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll do that, but maybe not. But yeah, I love birth doulas are just fantastic humans who help support the birthing person in advocating for themselves. They are different than a midwife. They're different than a nurse. They just are there to provide support and education around what birth is.
Okay.
And so I had a doula for both my births, and like her role, different doulas, but their role was to help me really understand what I wanted from my birth experience and support me in that process.
Again, this all makes complete sense. And yet, because of how we have systematized motherhood, this sounds revolutionary. So how did you, I mean, like, how did you get into it? In a, like, sounds like a cheap question, but like, this is a bit of a shift for you, because prior to this, you were doing hospital chaplaincy. Okay. Yeah. That's what I thought I remembered. So what's the shift towards this particular niche?
So I will clarify, it's a little bit of a mix. So
okay.
So I have my coaching practice is with all people. So I have like the transition, anybody going through transition, and then motherhood. So, and then also.
Thank you for that clarification. I missed that. So it's a life transitions coach and a postpartum doula. So the life transition coach is a lot of what you were probably doing in chaplaincy anyway, the same kind of energy. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same kind of energy, and just wanting, but it is actually, they really are very tied, because what I saw is that people tend to get help in the moment of crisis, and they don't have a lot of follow-up afterwards. And so part of the reason I wanted to go into coaching was to create an extra layer of space for people to have that follow-up care. Yeah. And then also to recognize sometimes you're in a major life transition and you don't need to go to the hospital. You just need somebody to talk to you. Yeah. And so like offering an additional support, because I realized a lot of people, like the type of support I offered as a chaplain, people are like, I've never encountered this anywhere. Like, you're just here to listen. You're just here to be empathetic. You're just here to help me think about what my values are so I can make a good decision. Like, what is that? And I'm like, well, it's my job as a chaplain, but it's also a resource that I would like all people to have everywhere.
Exactly. It's how I earn my paycheck, and something we should all have anyway. Yeah.
Right. And that's where like kind of the idea of coaching came in, because I realized I could do it outside of the hospital. I could do it with a lot of people. The postpartum doula came in part because of my own experience as a mom. And I didn't have a postpartum doula for my first, and it was really my first child was, we call him a trick baby. She was a trick baby. She for 4 weeks in, she slept through the night. Like, this is not normal baby behavior. And so 9 months later, I was pregnant with twins, which was insane. And so then bringing twins home to an 18-month-old, my yoga instructor basically like told me, she's like, I'm a postpartum doula and I'm going to come help you. Like, you are going to need this. And having her there, even though I had a lot of support, like I had family support, having her there was just dramatically different than any other support that I had, because I had no anxiety about helping her. And I think for a lot of women, like we are like, okay, so my mom's here, but I want to make sure my mom is comfortable.
Oh, I
My
love
best
that
friend
point.
came.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so it was just like, I completely relaxed and was able to just be like, okay, you're here to do these things and help me. And I don't have to worry about supporting you at all. And that was such a gift, and it was so amazing. And it got me really curious about like offering those supports to other people. But then also I realized all the things that even with some like basic classes, like nobody told me, like all three of my kids had tongue tie, which made it really hard for them to latch when nursing. There's so much pressure to breastfeed, but there's not a lot of education on like how to keep your milk supply up, like how many calories you should be eating as someone who's breastfeeding twins. Like, and so, and that's part of like just seeing like this lack of training and education for moms, this lack of support that comes while you're also get a lot of social pressure for women to have babies. Like, it's like, you're expected to do this, but we're not going to support you while you do it. And so, but receiving that support, I was like, I was really excited to receive it. And so I looked into the process of what it would look like for me to offer that support. And it did feel like a really beautiful accent to the work I want to do as a coach. And so, and they're kind of two different things, but they're really the same thing because I'm there to offer empathy, offer support, and offer education.
That's just like, my mind is blown because I really love the simplicity of this, that it's, of course this should be happening. Like, of course this should be part of human life. And, but then also the kind of recognition that anytime Western humans prioritize their own selves and bodies, it's like a revolutionary act, because we are so programmed to be our worth measured by our productivity, our worth measured by our paycheck, that the idea that you should get 40 days of somebody else taking care of you, I can see that triggering like some women that are like, oh, I can't be that selfish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, oh, I couldn't imagine, like, that's just too much. And that is like, that kind of just grieves me. Because I cannot imagine a single woman I know who gave birth who doesn't need this. I also can think of maybe only 4 that would have done it.
Right.
You know, like.
Yeah. No, when I first started talking to friends about even receiving it, they're like, oh, that sounds like such a luxury. Like, and the language I hear all the time is luxury. And I'm like, it is not a luxury for someone who is caring for someone else to be cared for.
No. And we assume that anytime, even when you have the flu and you're cared for, we speak about it like reverently, as though this is like something special. So it makes sense that, oh my gosh, wow. So how, when people talk to you about the luxury, what's the kind of way you work them over that understanding?
Well, I talk to them about just being realistic about what the first few weeks of birth are. And honestly, it depends on my relationship with the person. Like, if I'm close enough to the person, I will talk to them about how we as a society have created this idea that motherhood is supposed to be a struggle and that you haven't really mothered if you haven't suffered, and how that is not a healthy view of motherhood or humanity.
No. Talk to me a little bit more about that, because I know my feelings as a non-mother watching all of you be talked about the way that you are. But unpack that a little bit more.
So there is, and before I want to clarify, so I have, my birth experiences are both, like I did a non-medicated vaginal birth and I had a planned C-section. So I did like both, and I feel really happy with both of them. There's this way that we praise the non-medicated vaginal birth. We call it natural birth, as if it is the only way to have a baby that is natural. And I'm like, nope, like false. And like, I've even had people say, oh, you didn't really give birth the second time because it was a C-section. I'm like, yeah, major surgery is still birth. Just want to clarify that. And so it starts at the beginning. Like there's this judgment of like the true way to birth and mother. And there's this celebration of moms who struggle and suffer, as if, well, I'm going to back up. If you are a woman of privilege, there's a celebration of your suffering. If you are poor, if you are struggling, if you're oppressed, a lot of times there's a judgment of your suffering because it's like you brought it on yourself or something. So there is a difference. So I'm speaking from my place of privilege when I say that there's a celebration of suffering, because it shows that you are selfless, that you are willing to give all for your kids. And that is like the ultimate goal of motherhood. And I love my kids and I will give anything for them. But I also believe that I'm a better mom when I am calm, when I am supported, when I am able to love from a place of being filled up. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, and I don't think it's actually just moms, I think it's like all women. The book Burnout talks about human giver syndrome.
Yep.
And that actually is a lot of what I see in all women, but in motherhood especially, is like your job is to give, and you have no value.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that book, because we've talked about it on this channel before, because even those of us who are not mothering, and I'm making a conscious choice to do that, there are lots of women who are not mothers who did not make a conscious choice to do that. So there is a spectrum of mothering feelings across humanity, but the book is very clear that the kind of giving syndrome is very gendered. And so for those of us not making the mom choice, we are judged for that, because we're not then either a good enough woman, or we're not contributing to humanity, or the one I get all the time is that I'm one of those career women, as though that is like profanity, which is super fun.
Right.
So we have this spectrum, but it is so much more hyper focused, especially in my mind, on moms of young kids. Is that fair? Or do you think this or does it just keep getting worse as kids get older and all of that?
So because my kids are still young, I don't know.
That's totally fair. Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I don't know if it gets better or if it gets different. I think it just gets different.
That's a good word.
And I've talked to some friends who, like, we were recently, because my daughter just started kindergarten and I'm trying to figure out my schedule, and there's this,
how is she that old?
I know. But there's this discussion of like, oh, well, clearly you'll go back to like a traditional 9-to-5 job when your kids are in school. And I'm like, well, actually, I don't want that for myself. So I'm hoping not. Yeah. But like, that's the assumption. But even in that, I'm like, well, I don't know how I'm going to have a 9-to-5 job when my kid gets out of school at 2:15. Like, that's, and childcare is not cheap. No. And it shouldn't be, because they're taking care of a human. Like, I'm like, and so I'm like, I don't know that it gets better. I know it gets different. And my friend, like, I was talking to a fellow twin mom whose twins are like 12, and she was talking about taking a nap during the day. And I was like, that's a thing you can do? And she's like, yeah, eventually your kids will be sustainable enough humans that you can go to sleep while they're home. And I'm like, that sounds amazing.
Let's hit fast forward on that. Yeah. I think that's a great point, that it's a different, because there's other griefs and there's other adjustments and there's other things, and that's when we think about parenting in COVID. Like, my brother and his wife had a baby like 6 weeks before COVID started. So they were listening to a lot of their friends, though, that were stressing out about like what to do with their kids during the day. Well, Soph would have been like, she's not any different, necessarily. Yeah. And they were like, oh, we're so grateful she wasn't a little bit older. And then I talked to other friends that are like, oh my God, I'm so grateful they weren't in elementary school, or I'm so grateful they weren't in high school, or I'm so grateful. Like, we all have perceptions that other phases are more difficult.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting human experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, me and my husband definitely like, so when COVID first started, Walden wasn't in school. Mm-hmm. And then when she was in school, I was like, well, this is dramatically harder than her not being in school, because now I'm like, I need you to have an education. I need you to like do the things. Yeah. And last year I was like, yeah, just color all day. Like,
that's fine. Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, it was a problem. Well, and because my husband, like, we had a great first 6 months, because my husband was a teacher. So he was home. I worked in person at the hospital, but he was home. So I didn't have to worry about childcare. But then as things started opening up, that's actually when things got much more complicated for us, because he was teaching in person and I was in the hospital in person, and childcare wasn't like regular. I couldn't hire a part-time nanny the way I had in the past because I couldn't have that wasn't sustainable for the nanny. Like, she's like, I need a full salary, so I need to be in multiple homes. And I'm like, well, that's not safe for my kids. So yeah, it's been a really interesting struggle, I think, for all parents, and unique in how it, and like, and I will say all of us like all of the parents I know like are cracking up when people talked about how bored they were during COVID. And we were like,
business owners are the same way. Like, where was this? Like, I had time to learn how to make sourdough bread. That missed me. Like,
yeah, you're like, no, that's not a thing.
That wasn't a thing that happened. I'm wondering if that's going to be even, especially in your work with transitions and with postpartum, especially like folks who got pregnant during COVID in the next couple months, if that's going to be an extra thing that you're going to be finding.
I mean, it's definitely already like part of the reason I decided that now was the time to launch my coaching was that I was, in addition to the things I saw pre-COVID of like, oh, this is necessary and helpful in the world. Like, so many people are anxious, they're scared, they don't know what to do. Yeah. Their jobs went away, and they're trying to figure out what to do next. Yeah. And a lot of the tools that they had pre-COVID just don't work in this world. Like the systems they had set up don't work. And so like, how do you thrive and feel excited about your life whenever your life is nothing like what you thought it was because of a global pandemic? You couldn't have planned it. Like, you know, like I have a client that I love and I'm working with, and she's just like, you know, I never thought I'd be 40 and in this position. And I was like, she's like, I don't know how I could have planned better. I'm like, you could not have planned for a global pandemic. Like,
literally none of us could. Like,
none of us could. It's very evident. We did a really terrible job handling it. So obviously
this caught all of us by surprise.
Yeah.
Like, when I look back at like when I was had an in-person like dinner with the people that they were the last people I happened to hang out with before everything shut down, and we were reminiscing about like you know, our phones went off and it's like, oh, you know, Italy's shut down. Oh, I'm sure it won't come here, and like, you know, all of that kind of, my God, we were so naive. Yeah, no one could have. And then in the same way, none of us are quite prepared for what the next several phases look like. We don't know what it means to have a disrupted global supply chain for 18 months. We don't know what it means for kids to go back to school in the fall. We don't know what it means. We all have to give ourselves a little bit more grace than we're currently doing.
Yeah. No, I think, and that's, I mean, a huge in coaching and postpartum care, like it's just about like, give yourself grace for what's happening right now and recognize like you're doing the best you can with the tools you have right now in this season. You might need to develop some new tools, but the reality is you're already doing your best. So like, how do we work with that?
I love that so much that I'm going to end us there because I want that like stitched on a pillow. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. This was an utter delight. Friends, if you enjoyed this conversation, I'd love it if you gave it a thumbs up on YouTube. The algorithm really, really loves that thumbs up. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be great. If you enjoyed the conversation in general and you're into empathy and understanding different ways to be human, that's all we talk about on this channel. So please subscribe. The way to get a hold of Sarah is all the links are underneath the show notes. And I know she'd love to talk to you more about what her work looks like. And we always want to talk to more people about empathy. So again, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun. I'm so glad I got to be here.
And to everybody else, I wish for you what Sarah just said for her clients, that you will remember that you are doing the best you can with what you have right now. And we're all going to figure out how to get through all of this. And that counts for after the pandemic as well. So in the meantime, we'll see you next time on Welcome to My World. Bye, everybody.